My wife and I met Jeff Cole back at UCLA. Jeff was a lecturer in the School of Communications, Department of Communication. At UCLA, the largest lecture hall was in Moore Hall, and it was 500 people. When Jeff gave a lecture back then, many years ago, on impact mass media was having on different aspects of society, not only was that class full, but you couldn't walk in the hallways because people who were not enrolled in that class would be listening outside. He had that kind of attraction. Jeff, many, many years ago, the Congress under Paul Simon, Senator Paul Simon, not the singer, got very concerned about the rise in violence that was taking place in society. And so the four networks were funded a study on what was the relationship between violence in the media and violence in society. And Jeff Cole competed for that grant and got that. From that launched this new stage of his career. He gave testimony. Bill Clinton was the president at the time, so he's on all the network TVs nationwide, worldwide. Became an advisor to Bill Clinton in the White House. As he did more work in media studies, impact of media on all aspects of life, President Bush, he's an advisor to the Bush administration, to Al Gore. So now he's at Annenberg School of Communication at USC. He's directing a project where they have 10-year longitudinal databases in 35 different countries, including the US, on what has been the impact of the internet, digital media on all aspects of society, from family to social trends to media to how people interact. Even something as exotic as far removed from the last two spring breaks, where students have typically acted out and done all kinds of things, excessive drinking, drugs, and all that. Well, it's been tamed the last couple of years. Why? Because all of a sudden the students got word that could be taped, on a cell phone, and employers now are looking at what's on YouTube, what's on Facebook pages, and the word got out. So Jeff studies those kinds of trends. He spends a third of his time advising companies, anywhere from Microsoft, AT&T, Campbell Soup, to governments. He just got back from 10 Downing Street in England, advising that government, our government, because everybody wants to know what trends are taking place in social media, digital media, that's going to affect whatever aspects of society they're worried about at that time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Cole. I just want to personally thank Jeff. He's doing this as a favor for us and as a first major speaker. And I think you'll be fascinated by Jeff's presentation. And again, when he's finished, there'll be a 30 minutes Q&A, and just ask anything you want. If he can't answer it, probably nobody can on that topic. So with that, Jeff, Jeff Cole.
Thank you, Jack. Let me just make sure I'm on. It is wonderful to be at the #1 community college in America. Although I gotta tell you, it's a little unfair that you have the best students, the best faculty, the best administration in the most beautiful location in America. It's a little embarrassing. And I'm not just saying that to be polite. You know where we are. You just have to walk out the door. Anyway, it really is an honor to be here, to share some of what we do. I promised Jack that we'll get you all out of here by 11:30. So sit and get comfortable. And I hope I don't drive anyone crazy. I don't know if I'm a shaker, but I am a mover. So I'm going to move around a little bit. And I don't use PowerPoint, not because I'm trying to prove anything. I just sort of found I didn't need it. And it lets me be more nimble, and it lets me really try to focus on the things you want to focus on. So I want to talk about the ways in which digital technology are changing the world. But before I do that, I want to take about 3 or 4 minutes and tell you about the work I do so that you can see where my data and my insights come from. I'm an old television guy. I've spent most of my life in and around the world of television, the most powerful medium ever invented. And in the work I did in television, I was always taught that we blew it where television was concerned. We lost a great opportunity. And what I mean by that is television, if you think about it, is the only mass medium we knew ahead of time was going to be a mass medium. There was no question in the 40s that radio listeners were going to embrace radio with pictures. So since we knew television was going to be a phenomenon before the first signal was ever broadcast, what I was taught that we should have done but didn't do is we should have tracked people before they had television and then gone back to them year after year as they acquired and used television to see how it changed their lives. And if we had done that, we would have learned some very powerful things, starting with where did the time for television come from? When people were watching 3 hours of television a day, and we asked them, what are you doing less of? Where did that time come from? They didn't know. They just sort of grabbed it out of the air. We could have learned if the time for television came from talking as a family, reading books or newspapers, sleep, or from some other place. And then I became convinced in the 90s that digital technology, first the web and now mobile, was going to be far more powerful than television. So believing that we lost a great opportunity with television and that digital was going to be even more important than television, 13 years ago, we launched this massive project, this tracking of digital that we thought should have been conducted of television in the 40s. We started in the year 2000 in the United States. We took a representative sample of the American population, and we've gone back to the same people 13 years and counting. And we've watched as people have gone from non-user to dial-up. As they migrated from dial-up to broadband, we saw almost immediately broadband changed everything, but not because of the speed. It was the always-on, the direct connection of broadband that changed everything. We watch as 2% drop off the web each year, and we want to know who are these people who leave and why, and more importantly, do they return, and if so, when, and what brings them back. And then 13 years in, we still track the never users. Who are the people who have never gone online and why? How do they do things offline the rest of us do online? And increasingly, they pay more to do it offline than we do online. And then a question we're working with governments around the world, should we care about the never users? Should we be pushing them online, cajoling them, subsidizing them? Or should we let them live their lives peaceably and happily disconnected from the web? So we started this work in the US. We're now doing it, actually, I normally say 35 countries, but actually this morning on a Skype call, we added our 36th country. We added the Republic of Georgia. But we're doing it in 36 countries around the world, all the places you would expect in Europe and Asia and Latin America, but also some pretty interesting places like Iran. We're starting to make more progress in Africa. So that's the work I do. We have data 13 years and on, looking at how this technology is changing the world. And frequently people ask us, when will you stop? And my answer to that was, if you started studying television in the 40s, when would you have stopped? Because television is only getting more interesting today. And I think the answer is we'll stop when it stops getting interesting. And of course, that means it'll go on probably long after me. So that's the work we do. Let me share what I think are some key trends over the last 13 years that I'm interested in, and I think you'll be interested in. Let's start with how traditional media are changing. I don't think any mass medium goes away or disappears. I used to teach mass comm at UCLA, and I used to argue that no medium goes away, they adapt, they change. If ever a medium were going to go away, it would have been radio after the beginning of television. when television sucked all the content out of radio, took all the stars out of radio, radio didn't roll over and die. It adapted. It formed relationships with the music industry. And today, radio is a vibrant and important medium, but a smaller medium and a smaller business than it used to be. We think all of our mass media survive, but all of them survive as smaller players in a digital era, with one big exception. And we'll get to the exception at the end. Now, this has been going on even before the internet. If you take theatrical film, going to the movies in the theater, in 1946, we sold 4.3 billion movie tickets. Last year, the population more than doubled since 1946. To keep pace, you would have had to sell about 9 billion movie tickets. Instead, last year, we sold 1.3 billion. Put another way, 1946, 90 million people a week went to the movies. Last year, population more than doubled. 22 million people a week went to the movies. Theatrical film is a tiny business compared to what it used to be. It remains a high-profile business, a highly profitable business. It drives the home video business, which lately has been driving itself over a cliff. And it's not a coincidence that theatrical film reached its peak in 1946. That was on the eve of the introduction of television. Incidentally, Hollywood will tell you Avatar, the most successful film ever made, that's a fraud. Avatar, only the most successful film ever made. If you look at its average ticket price, and Avatar is an unusual example because 2/3 of the people who saw Avatar in the theater saw it in 3D or IMAX and paid $2 to $5 more per ticket. So Avatar, only the most successful film of all time. If you look at its 2010 average ticket price of $14 and compare it with no conversions to Gone with the Wind's average ticket price of 23 cents. Under that formula, you had to sell 57 tickets to Gone with the Wind to equal one Avatar. If you adjusted for inflation, or just make it simpler and do what I do, look at number of tickets sold, Avatar still hugely successful, but it falls to number 9 in the films of all time, just behind Pinocchio. Pinocchio is a great film. Gone with the Wind towers as the number 1 film, unless you just compare 1939, 23 cents to... The reason they do that, incidentally, is it gives the buzz and the hype to the new film, the current thing. The music business. The music business historically has had a business model nothing short of extortion. The business model of the music industry for most of our lives has said, you like 2 songs? You have to go out and spend $15 on a CD. Today, interest in music has never been greater. People are listening to more music in more places than they ever have before. Love of music is greater than it's ever been. But people aren't going to the music store and spending $15 on a CD. In most cities, you can't find a music store. The 2 flagship music stores in America, Tower Records on Sunset Strip, been gone since 2008, Virgin Megastore in Times Square, along with every other Virgin Megastore in America, gone since 2009. I thought there were no Virgin Megastores in the world, but I saw one recently in Dubai, and I saw one on the Champs-Élysées, both of which say they're closing soon. But anyway, people aren't going to the music store and spending $15 for 2 songs. They're going online and either stealing the 2 songs they want, or they're going to legal downloading services, the best example, iTunes, and spending $2 or $2.58. The music industry, if they get it right, if they figure out how to get you, and more importantly, your children, to go online and buy their music rather than steal it. And that's a big if. If they do, then what used to produce $15 now produces $2, and that's if they succeed. So it will be a smaller business. They've learned how to make money out of touring, out of merchandising, out of endorsements. Now, I use this very provocative statement, business model, nothing short of extortion. I'll give you 2 examples to show the way I think it's extortion. One, I have friends at one of the big record labels, and they released an album 10 years ago, a Cher album, that had the international hit song, Believe. Do you believe? Huge hit. And my friends at her own label admit there was not another listenable song on the entire album. And they made people go out and buy the entire album for one song. Second example, I counted recently, I have 400 CDs. I'm the last generation that will ever own 400 CDs. Today's teenagers are the last generation that will ever own any CDs. So I counted among my 400 CDs and asked how many of these, if I could have bought them song by song, would I have bought more than 2 songs? And there were 18 of them, or 4%. There was Pink Floyd's The Wall, I would have bought every song. So, but only 4%. So as I look at my 400 CDs, I'm looking at all this music I treasure. I was also looking at thousands of dollars I was compelled to spend that I wouldn't have spent if I had a choice. And then sadly, newspapers, and this pains me to say this, sometimes people think because I say it, I like it. This causes me great pain. 30 years ago, teenagers didn't read newspapers, but they started to when they got into their 20s and 30s. Today, teenagers don't read newspapers, and the evidence is clear, they never will. Now, a lot of people look at that and say, well, they just don't care about news. All they care about is what's happening on Facebook or Twitter. Not true. Worldwide, teenagers today more interested in news than any teenage generation in the last 70 years. They've figured out that what happens halfway around the world can change their lives. They're just not going to the newspaper, they're going online. And every country in the world we are in, and I said we're now in 36, although we don't have data from the 36th, and every country in the world we are in, when internet penetration gets to 30%, newspaper sales begin to decline. So India, where internet penetration's at 9%, printed newspaper sales are soaring. But when a country gets to 30%, at least so far, that begins to decline. The sad truth for newspapers, and there's no way around this, is every time a newspaper reader dies, he or she is not being replaced by a new reader. Now, we saw this 10 years ago. In 2003, I was invited by the American Society of Newspaper Editors, who incidentally changed their name 2 years ago to the American Society of News Editors. They dropped the paper. I was invited by the ASNE to speak to their annual conference. And I told them 10 years ago exactly what I just said now. I said, every time one of your readers dies, they're not being replaced by a new reader. And then I looked them in the eye and I said, you guys have 25 to 30 years left. Figure it out. They called me dangerous. They called me an alarmist. They called me every name they could think of, except the one name that would have been accurate. I was an optimist. Because if I was right 10 years ago that they had 25 to 30 years left, today they would have 15 to 20. In America, we're down to the last 5. In 1900, we've seen the San Francisco Chronicle lose a quarter of its circulation in 12 months. We've seen my beloved Los Angeles Times go from over 1 million subscribers a day to under 700,000. 5 years ago, if Rupert Murdoch wanted to buy the Los Angeles Times, I would have screamed and argued he was a ruiner. Today, he's the paper's savior. He wants to buy it, and he still loves newspapers and will invest. In 1900, in America, we had 600 communities that had 2 or more newspapers. Today, we have 5. Instead of counting down the 2 newspaper towns, we're now counting up the no newspaper towns. Now, newspapers have a great life online. We're only talking about the end of the newspaper. So all of these media survive. Most survive as smaller players. The exception is television. We think television will explode with growth, be bigger than it's ever been, escape from the home, and become our constant companion. Now, we should coin a new term instead of television. To most people, television means the set in the home on a schedule. And all television means today is audio and video. YouTube and Hulu are as much television as ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, or CNN. But even though we should coin a new term, we're using the word television. And our work has shown conclusively for the last 5 or 6 years that people will watch television on a little screen in their pocket or purse. Not just 2 or 3 minute news packages or sports clips, but 30, 60, 90-minute shows. Sometimes we'll watch a 30-minute show straight through on our phone if we're stuck at the airport. Sometimes we'll watch it in 8 or 10 parts. Keep in mind that at the same time as we're putting these little screens in our pockets, we're putting bigger and better screens in our homes than we've ever had before. The gap between the home and the theater has never been so narrow. The time gap has never been so short. And we will save our preferred content for the big screen. I gave a talk at the Cannes Lions Awards last year, and there was a Canadian in the audience, and he raised his hand and said, "I'm a Canadian, and I'm a big hockey fan," which is pretty redundant if you think about it. And he said, "Why would anybody watch a hockey game on a mobile phone?" And he's right. If you love hockey, you'll seek out the biggest and best screen you can find, unless you can't get to the big screen, and it's more important to see it sooner rather than later. 3 years ago, we did some work with our partners in Europe during the World Cup finals, and we were talking to people who had to work during the World Cup finals. And given a choice between watching it delayed on a big screen, and you know how frustrating it is to watch sports after the game is over, but a choice between watching it delayed on a big screen or live on a little screen, almost everybody chose live on a little screen. Nobody's going to watch Avatar for the first time on a mobile phone, or The Life of Pi for the first time on a mobile phone, and you shouldn't watch it on an airplane. You should watch it in a theater. But we may watch it the second, third, or fourth time on a little phone. And as we do, something very powerful happens to television. It escapes from the home. Television couldn't grow until now because for almost all of us, it has dominated our at-home awake time. Most of us turn the television set on the moment we enter the home, leave it on till we go to sleep. Some of us go to sleep with it on. Some of us leave it on when we're not at home so that people think we are at home. And if you're going to carve out time at home to do anything, take a walk, take a nap, take a shower, the time for that almost has to come from television. And television never existed outside the home until now, with a couple of exceptions. If you're in the hospital and you're sick, that's your home. If you're in the bar, for some people, that's their home. But now people will be watching television at the airport, waiting for a flight, on the airplane itself, in the back seat of our cars, hopefully not the front seat while we're driving, and television becomes our constant companion. Who's our constant companion now? If you're stuck at the airport waiting for a plane, most of us don't pull out books or newspapers or magazines. We pull out our mobile phones and start calling people. It's only after someone answers do we figure out whether we really have anything we want to say to them. My mother figured this out a long time ago. Whenever I call my mother, she'll say, "What, you're stuck somewhere? You have nothing better to do than to call me?" And she's right, but she also figured out, hey, it means we get to talk more often. 1975, we spent 16 hours a week in front of a screen. Last year, it was 44 hours. The difference was 1975, it was one screen in the home on a schedule, and now it's 3, or depending on how you count tablets, it's 4 screens. Teenagers, there's practically not a moment of their life that's not in front of a screen, except when they're in school and asleep. And I think more teenagers are using mobile phones at school than we'd like to admit, not just during lunch and recess. And as far as sleep, 80% of teenagers sleep next to their mobile phones. Now, if you ask them, why do you sleep next to your mobile phone? They'll give you one very simple, practical answer. Anyone want to tell us what it is? It's my alarm clock. We learned, not just us, you learned as parents, but we all learned 10, 12 years ago, teenagers aren't wearing watches. I made the comment, I thought it was a joke, it turned out it wasn't. I made the comment 12 years ago that I said that teenagers aren't wearing watches. Now the entire jewelry industry, not to mention the economy of Switzerland, is waiting to the answer to the question, will they start wearing watches when they get older? Well, we've been tracking them for 13 years, which means we have 15-year-olds in the beginning who were 28 and so on. They're still not wearing watches. Incidentally, this is not a problem for Rolex. Nobody spends $10,000 on a Rolex because it tells better time. If all you want's accurate time, you don't have to spend more than $10. People buy a Rolex because it either makes them feel better about themselves or sends a message to the world. The second reason they sleep next to their mobile phone is a more complicated reason they may not even be aware of. It's a reason, it's not our term, it's an acronym, FOMO. Anyone know what FOMO is? Go ahead. Fear of missing out. Fear that something is happening in their social life and they're not going to know about it until it's too late. So the best way to minimize FOMO is to sleep next to your phone and have it be the last thing you do before you go to sleep, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning, and if you wake up in the middle of the night, you may do it then as well. So these things are, incidentally, just for those of you who have smartphones, we found people almost never lose their smartphones. They can be stolen, they can drop them in the gutter, and they can break. We also almost never leave them at home. And the reason we don't lose them is that if we leave them on a table in a restaurant, most of us can't get to the door before we're reaching for it. We access it so much we can't get far enough away from it to leave it behind. Whereas if I leave a credit card on a table in a restaurant, it may take me 3 days to notice it's gone, and I have to retrace my steps. We've also seen the ratings for live television events are skyrocketing. This year's Super Bowl went down a fraction, but last year's Super Bowl was the highest rated television program of all time, beating the previous record, which was the Super Bowl of the year before, and that broke a 28-year record, which was the last episode of MASH. But it's not just the Super Bowl, it's live events, sporting events, award shows, the Olympics last summer, all kinds of live events. And the reason live ratings are so high is co-viewing, watching with other people. Now, we've always watched television with other people. The difference is, until now, the other people had to be in the room with us. Now we're watching when the other people aren't in the room with us, and we're communicating through our smartphones, our internet-enabled televisions. I think the little crawl at the bottom of the screen that came into fashion after 9/11 is going to be replaced soon by a social networking crawl that will let us type in what we're thinking about the show, and our network of friends will see at the bottom of the screen our thoughts and our opinions. I think one of the killer apps of the next 2 years, now that 50% of us have PVRs or TiVos, I think is going to be an app that's going to let 5, 10, 15 of us record a show, agree to watch it at a certain time, and the app will synchronize our DVRs. So we're seeing exactly the same thing at the same moment, so we can share the experience with people in 15 different places. We're really seeing co-viewing. 3 numbers, I don't want to give you a lot, 3 numbers that didn't change for 10 years, from 2001 to 2011. For those 10 years, we saw 70% of people regularly went from television to the internet. They saw something on television that drove them to the web. 60%, almost as many, went from the web to television. But until a year ago, only 14% were ever online and watching television at the same time with related content. That doesn't count watching American Idol while you're answering your email. That means watching American Idol while you're on the American Idol site. That 14% has tripled in the last 18 months. To 42, or just under half, are now regularly watching television and online at the same time. And of course, the thing that has enabled that is new screens, particularly tablets. I think the iPad is transformational. Invite me back in a year or two, and I might amend that to tablets are transformational. But right now, it's the iPad. Samsung, Hewlett-Packard, Motorola, RIM, they've all had 3 years to catch up with the iPad. The iPad celebrated its 3rd anniversary about 2 weeks ago. They've all had 3 years to catch up. None of them have. The only people who have caught up with Apple and the iPad are Apple themselves with the iPad 2, the iPad 3, and the iPad 4. It's almost as if the goalposts have been moved before the other team even took to the field. Now, I have friends at Apple who say off the record, and at Apple you have to speak off the record, because if you ever spoke on the record, you could be killed. And that's only a slight exaggeration. They say off the record that 2 years ago, when they were preparing to release the iPad 2, they were planning to drop the price by $150. But they looked around and said, nobody's beating us on price. Nobody's beating us on features. Why bother? And they were right, because they introduced the iPad 2 in March of 2011. Over the summer, Hewlett-Packard introduced their touchpad, which had exactly the same entry price as the iPad, $499 for 16 gigabytes. People looked at the HP touchpad and said, who cares? HP, realizing they had a problem, a month later dropped the price by $100 to $399. People still looked at it and said, who cares? Then they made this astonishing decision to shut down the entire PC division, a decision they since have rethought, but they fired their CEO over it. And they dropped the price of the touchpad to $99. Finally, people cared. The problem for Hewlett-Packard is it cost them $309 to make a touchpad. So the lesson is clear. You're willing to lose $210 per tablet, you've got a hit on your hand. And of course, how do you make that up? Volume, volume, volume. So the iPad comes out, and my job is to look at this thing and say, is this the fourth screen, or does it replace the second screen? I think we all count screens the same way, but just to be sure, television is the first screen, computers are the second screen, smartphones are the third screen. Movie theater owners have been complaining, hey, we're the fourth screen, but nobody takes that seriously, probably because you don't buy or own that screen. So my job is the iPad and the tablet to replace the second, or is it a fourth screen? I firmly believe it replaces the second. We think the PC is going away, except for 4 to 6% of the population. The 4 to 6% who will continue to use PCs, computer-assisted designers, heavy-duty number crunchers, big writers, college students while they're in college. To the rest of us, a PC is a needlessly complex device, difficult to learn, takes 5 minutes to boot, and 1 out of every 30 times encounters the blue screen of death. A tablet, on the other hand, you hand a tablet to a 3-year-old boy or an 83-year-old grandmother, and within 5 minutes, both will be using it. The only difference is within 5 minutes, the 3-year-old boy will be teaching you things you didn't know. It boots instantly. If you turn off your tablet forgetting to do something, you don't have to negotiate with yourself, is it important enough to go back as you do with your computer, because you're back instantly, and there's no blue screen of death. I don't know any business people, when they're going on a trip, if they have an iPad and a laptop, who don't look at their laptop and then look at their tablet and then look back at their laptop and say, can I leave you at home? What they're saying is, I want to leave you at home, but they're thinking about what do they have to do, and increasingly they do leave it at home. And keep in mind the limitations on an iPad come not from the technology or the device, they came from the stubbornness of Steve Jobs. The refusal to have Adobe Flash, there's no reason an iPad can't have Adobe Flash. That was simply Jobs declaring war on Adobe, a war he won just before he passed away. The refusal to have a USB port, you could have one in an instant. The other tablets do. Jobs just wanted a complete walled garden. But now Jobs is gone, and keep in mind, Jobs never wanted an iPad mini, and it took till after he was gone for Tim Cook to introduce one. And Jobs' biographer, Walter Isaacson, says that Jobs' fingerprints will be on everything that comes out of Apple for 24 months after his death. Well, we're now in month 18, which means there's 6 more months, if Walter's right, of Jobs' influence. Tablets also change the way we interact with this technology. I gave a talk at the World Mobile Congress last year. 4 people used this example. They weren't stealing from each other. They just experienced the same thing. 4 people talked about their young children going to the television set, going like this, and then saying, "Daddy, why is it broken?" And of course it's broken. That's the way you navigate. These things have to be intuitive, because you've probably noticed, on the one hand, this technology is getting more and more complex in what it can do. And on the other hand, we don't read any manuals anymore. The manuals are online, and they're 300 pages. But if this thing can't be figured out immediately, even though we may only use a small percentage of it, we don't want it. There was a great YouTube video last year. Some people said it was fake. Maybe it was. That showed a one-year-old girl sitting with a magazine on her lap, going like this, and getting frustrated when nothing happened, because that's the way stuff happens. Another trend I want to look at, one of the most powerful, social networking. And I have my own unique trend on social networking. And so I'm looking at my watch, not because I have anywhere I have to be. I just want to make sure that I'm pacing myself. We think social networking is the real deal. The first thing that caused people to log onto the web more than to check their email. Now, I think which social network a teenager is in is a fad or a trend. 2005, Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace for $580 million. And he bought it because he said it would allow him to reach the teenagers he couldn't reach through his newspapers, and it were even getting harder to reach through his television networks. At about the same time in 2005 that Murdoch bought MySpace, we released our 5th annual report. I was being interviewed by reporters who were asking us all the things we were finding in year 5. And then the last question, sort of a throwaway question, was, what do you think about Murdoch buying MySpace? And I said I thought it was a great investment. That part of the quote got lost forever. But he would never be able to hang on to the teenage users of MySpace. They got angry when I said that, and they fought back not by saying you're wrong. They fought back by saying, look how much money we're making. They're absolutely right. Even though they paid $580 million and sold it about 18 months ago for $35 million to a group of investors, including Justin Timberlake, it was a great investment. They didn't lose money. Almost the day they bought it, they signed a $900 million ad share deal with Google, practically doubling their investment. They brilliantly marketed their Fox films and television shows on it, and they sold a lot of advertising. MySpace was a great investment, but we were right. They weren't able to hang on to their teenage users. It's not that we were so smart. We had seen the rise and fall of a social network a few of you may have used, GeoCities or Friendster, and we knew, and I got a tremendous amount of coverage. I wasn't looking for it when I said this, but I guess people liked the quote. We said that to a teenager back in '05, that to a teenager, an online community is like a nightclub. And when the nightclub becomes too popular, or the uncool kids start showing up at the at the nightclub, you're out of there. And as a teenager, what's the worst thing that could happen to you in a nightclub? Not literally the worst. Literally the worst is somebody with a bomb or a gun coming in. But to most teenagers, what's the worst thing that could happen to you in a nightclub? Your mother walks in. Well, now your mother wants to friend you on Facebook. How long are you going to hang around in a place with your cool friends where your mother's hanging around? So 2 years ago, we released our 10th report. Some of the same reporters were there, and they said, okay, you got it right with MySpace. What's going to happen to Facebook? And I can stand here and tell you we were right with MySpace. It's going to take another 3 or 4 years to see if we're right with Facebook. But I said the same thing happens to Facebook, with 2 exceptions. One, we think Facebook will grow for the next 4 or 5 years. It's already at 1 billion users. I think it'll grow to maybe 1.5 billion. So if you go to Brazil, 2 years ago, Orkut, O-R-K-U-T, their social network was practically a way of life or a religion. It's now disappearing. Same thing in India. So Facebook will grow for another 4 or 5 years. Maybe I'm wrong and it's 6 or 7. And we don't think Facebook ever goes away. I think Facebook survives forever. They hate it when I say this, but I don't think this is so terrible. We think it survives forever as the place you go to communicate with your mother and father, aunts and uncles, and brothers and sisters. It essentially becomes the phone book of life. It's where you find everybody, and if somebody from high school finds you, they'll find you on Facebook, but we think in the future, if you want a relationship, you'll move it somewhere else to a smaller, more specialized community. Since we've said this, said this 2.5 years ago, there's a lot of research out that shows in the US, UK, and Canada, Facebook use and the numbers on are dropping. A very powerful study came out about 2 months ago that shows to teenagers, Tumblr is much more popular than Facebook. So we'll see if we're right. And a couple of things, Facebook confuses everybody, especially marketers. Nobody feels like they've got their hands around this. Even the companies that I would argue are ahead of everybody, Coca-Cola, Nike, American Express, think they're behind. People are really nervous. I had dinner about 6 months ago with the CMO of Kimberly-Clark. I love this story. I hope it doesn't offend anybody. I think it's sort of cute. So the CMO of Kimberly-Clark says, you want to know what we do? If it leaks from the human body, we make a product. They sell Kleenex, toilet paper, Kotex and other feminine hygiene products. They sell Huggies, Depend, the adult undergarments. So his question was, do people really want to have a relationship with the company that makes their toilet paper? And the answer is yes. And one other example, I gave a talk about 3 years ago at the Google Zeitgeist, their thought leadership conference. And as part of my talk, I was having a conversation with one of the biggest marketers in the world, a guy who spends over $1 billion a year on marketing. And we were talking, and I was asking him all these digital questions, and he wasn't answering them. And I don't know why he agreed to be on the panel, but he was a friend, so finally I got frustrated, and I turned to him and I said, come on, you can admit it. If I got you alone late at night, filled you with alcohol, you can confess. Don't you wish the internet would just go away? And he said, no, we love the internet. It teaches us things we've never known. It puts us in touch with our customers. And then as we're walking off stage, he said, you know, you have no idea how often I wish it would go away. Most people would like to get back when things were simpler and clear, and it's not coming back. One next to last very powerful trend, something I haven't talked about in 10 years, e-commerce. Back in 2000, 2001, and 2002, I talked about e-commerce all the time. Because back then, people were afraid to buy online. They were afraid they couldn't trust the merchant. They were afraid the product wouldn't be delivered, or it would be delivered damaged and too difficult to return. And they hated the lack of a live human being in the sales process. We found by 2002, those things all went away. People found they could trust the merchant. If they couldn't, they could just call their credit card company. The product was usually delivered, and if it was damaged or they didn't like it, in most cases, it's easier to return than going to the store because you print out a label and hand it to your letter carrier. And the lack of a live human being in the sales process was quickly transformed from one of the things people liked the least about buying online to one of the things they liked the most about buying online. They liked not dealing with people unless they had a problem. Then they wanted an 800 number. So the only headline for 10 years, it was important, but it wasn't interesting, was e-commerce growing, more people buying, spending more money, buying more often. Important, but not interesting. But in the last year and a half, 2 years, it's changed completely. If you look at Amazon Prime, how many of you are Amazon Prime members? Fairly healthy number. Amazon Prime, for those who are not familiar, $79 a year, you get unlimited second-day shipping. And what a lot of Prime members don't know is for an extra $4 per package, you can get next-day shipping. But the brilliance of $79 of unlimited second-day shipping is once you pay the $79, it feels like it's free. And then they throw, if you're interested, they throw thousands of hours of television and movies at you as well. But now with second-day shipping at only $79, what people are buying online has changed completely. Now people are buying toothpaste, deodorant, floss, batteries. Half the diapers in America are sold online through subscription models. Subscription models is where Amazon figures out how many diapers you need and sends them on a regular basis. You can adjust that. But the thing about diapers is you need them from the day you need them till the day you don't need them, which, depending on your parental philosophy of toilet training, can be between 1 and 4 years, hopefully no later than 4 years. And diapers, they're not heavy, but they're bulky. So instead of having to put them in your trunk, they're delivered to your front door. You bring them in, and they're cheaper. And if you're talking about adult diapers, or actually the correct term is adult undergarments, if you're talking about adult undergarments, you avoid the embarrassment factor. But now with second-day unlimited shipping, the only reason to go to Duane Reade, CVS, Rite Aid, is that if you need a product in the next sooner than 48 hours, if you need a battery or toothpaste in the next 6 hours, and that's changing. Most of you know that we had a Supreme Court decision around 1990 that said that if you are a merchant selling and you have a brick and mortar presence in the state, you have to collect sales tax. So Amazon put their fulfillment centers in small, out-of-the-way states like Delaware, so they didn't have to charge sales tax. And in California, we essentially all got a 9% discount buying online. It wasn't fair to merchants. Now, technically, this was illegal. Technically, I don't know if most of you or some of you know this. Technically, you've been required from day one to declare on your income tax what's known as a use tax, declaring how much money you spent online and then paying sales tax. And I think in California, 2 people last year actually did that. But that was the law, but there was no way of enforcing it. So California, as you know, until very recently, until we raised our taxes, was broke. And so the state estimated they were losing $300 million a year to Amazon, not collecting sales tax. Plus, it was unfair to brick and mortar merchants. And even though I love that 9% discount, it is unfair. So the state of California threatened to sue Amazon. Amazon said, go ahead. If you try to collect, we'll put a referendum on the ballot that will let the voters decide. And you can imagine what the voters would have decided. Do you want a 9% discount or not? And then at the last minute, Amazon backed off and said, OK, as of September 15th, 2012, we'll collect sales tax. And of course, now they do. Why did they agree to do that? Was it because they cared about the quality of California? Was it because they wanted to be a good corporate citizen? Of course not. They did it because they made a calculation that as soon as they agreed to collect sales tax, they could put their fulfillment centers in San Bernardino, outside of San Francisco, in Brooklyn, outside of New York. And why did they want to do that? Same-day delivery. Amazon very soon is going to say to you, in some markets they already do, order it online by 10 o'clock in the morning, you'll get it by 6 o'clock in the evening. And all of a sudden, when it comes within hours, the only reason to go to Target, Rite Aid, CVS, is if you need that battery in the next 4 hours. This is going to be devastating. And if you look at the industries that have already been affected, if you look back, it was 1997. One of the most popular movies of the year, I'm sure many of you saw it, was You've Got Mail. with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. Meg Ryan in her last cute role. And sad but true. She decided after that she wanted to be a serious actress, and things didn't work out as well. And I love Meg Ryan. But in that movie, she owned the mom and pop bookstore, and Tom Hanks' family was really Barnes and Noble, but they were called Fox, a fictitious name, and his family were the Predators. Well, less than 10 years later, the mom and pop store is gone, and the Predators have become the prey. I think if you want to see the real successor to Steve Jobs, as the smartest guy in the room, the guy who can see around corners, and whose personality is every bit as unpleasant, it's not Tim Cook at Apple, it's Jeff Bezos. They're now moving into the wine business, they're moving into the fashion business, and ultimately they're going to want to sell every car in America, and I bet they will. One very last short trend, I love this trend, and I think many of you will identify with it very quickly. Nobody wants to give up the internet. There are things about the internet we don't like. Spyware, viruses, spam, none of that caused people to leave. Earlier I said 2% drop off each year. That 2% are people who change jobs and lose access, who PCs break and haven't gotten around to buying a new one or can't afford it. But those people come back. Nobody gives up the internet out of dissatisfaction. But many of us are tired of it defining or controlling our lives. Even though we use wireless technology, we're tired of thinking of it like a ball and chain or an umbilical cord. What we're trying to do is to enjoy the benefits of all this technology without experiencing all the disadvantages. We realized many times we couldn't leave the office if we didn't have this technology. Sometimes we couldn't go on vacation if we didn't have it, but it doesn't mean that we have to be using it every minute of vacation. This desire to enjoy the benefits without experiencing the disadvantages, we've given a name to. We call this enough already. E-N-U-F-F. Couple of examples of enough already. I'm somebody, I can't go to sleep until I answer all my email. And you know what happens if I answer all my email just before I go to sleep? Damn it, while I'm sleeping, everybody answers me. And when I wake up in the morning, it's there again and never goes away. Our work shows that of those who use the internet in their jobs, 75% say it has made them more productive. 5% say it's made them less productive. 20% say it hasn't made any difference. So 3/4 say it's made them more productive. People make comments like, now I can do in 30 hours what it used to take 40 hours to do. The problem is nobody works 30 hours and calls it a week. We're taking on more work than we've ever taken on before. The lines between work and home have blurred. We're working Saturday mornings, Sunday nights, Christmas Eve, New Year's Day. Enough already. One last example. It's also device fatigue. I'm embarrassed to admit that when I travel, I have 8 charger cables in my suitcase. But the best example of this I ever saw was my friend last summer sent his 16-year-old daughter to London on a school tour. Since it was a school tour, they put 3 girls to a room, and they put them in older, less expensive hotels in London, if such things exist. These 3 16-year-old girls got to their room and discovered to their absolute horror there was 1 electrical outlet in the room. 3 girls, 3 digital cameras, 2 cell phones, 2 iPads, 1 Kindle, 2 Bluetooth earpieces, and 3 hair dryers. Although in fairness, hair dryers don't have to be charged. These girls set the alarm clock every 90 minutes throughout the night to get up so they could take 2 devices out and put new ones in. But the problem is most devices don't charge in 90 minutes. My iPad takes 7 hours. So as one girl's less than fully charged device was being removed, she'd scream, "Wait, stop, it's not done." It was like Lord of the Flies in there. This is too much dependence. And if you look back in the 80s, there were silly people, I say silly people, like Donald Trump or Michael Milken, who used to brag about the fact they only got 3 hours a night sleep. And they were somehow implying that sleep was wasted time, time that could be spent making money. And it's been interesting, now in the last 10 years, people like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, he brags about the fact that he gets 9 hours a night sleep. And the message is clear. If you're powerful enough, you can sleep as much as you want, which is why the New York Times is now trying to coin a new term building off of FOMO. The new term, this hasn't caught on, but I sort of like this. The new term to describe the trend of 2013 is JOMO, the joy of missing out. The people who are now taking pleasure in disconnecting. And although it's interesting, if you look at Hurricane Sandy last fall in New York, if you lived above 34th Street, it was just a storm. The next day it was sunny and life was good. But if you lived below 34th Street, many people were without power, there was flooding. And what was the biggest disadvantage or deprivation of being below 34th Street? You couldn't charge your devices, which is why people above 34th Street were taking power strips, putting them in the front of the building. Cory Booker, the mayor of Newark, opened his home so people could come in and charge their devices. That's nice. The problem is these devices take a couple hours to charge, and who wants them in your home that long? But he did. But this is now the new being disconnected when you don't want to be disconnected, as opposed to those who take joy in it. That's a little bit of work that we do. I could have gone on forever and ever. It may feel like I did. Anyone who's interested in learning more about our work, we're not selling you anything, you can go to our website, which is just digitalcenter.org, O-R-G. And with that, I would be delighted to take questions. If anybody disagrees, I'm not offended by that. When you disagree with me, I learn, I'm able to strengthen my opinion and learn from the vitality of yours. So I think there are microphones.
Yeah, there's a microphone somewhere. If not, we'll repeat your question. But anyway, before we get to questions, I just want to give a round of applause to Jeff Call.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. So,
thank you, Jack. Do we have a?
is there any questions?
I see a question. Do we have a
Sure. I'll start
Do we
back
have
there
a
in the back.
microphone? I'll make sure I don't forget you.
In your work, do you do anything with respect to user interfaces? So do you see Siri or some kind of voice interface as the next thing?
I think everybody could hear you, but just in case you're asking, in our work, do we look at user interfaces such as Siri? What we look at are consumers. And we want to know what they like, what they don't like, what they're comfortable with. We found with regard to Siri that people love Siri in the beginning, and then the use seemed to trickle off a lot. So we're looking at, I think, we can't ask our panels about this yet because it's too soon. I think the next big thing, and some of you are familiar with this and some are not, is Google Glass. Google is now introducing, they just made them available for $1,500 for those who wanted to be testers. This is a pet project of Sergey Brin, one of the founders, co-founders of Google. It's the idea that in glass, it can be your glasses, and now they've made deal with fashion houses to do trendy glasses, even if you don't need glasses, is the entire internet. So that you can look at maps while you're driving. The idea that the internet is right there. This may be a geeky, it may not be Google Glass that works, but the idea of having the internet right in your line of sight I think is very powerful and is going to come. So we do look at user interfaces.
Okay, over here.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, what do you think now?
What do I think of the possibility of making phones and other electrical devices charge in less than an hour? My friends tell me it's that battery technology, what's happening on the 787 notwithstanding, that battery technology is getting better and better. And not only should we be able to charge, some people say even faster than an hour, but what you already can do, but it's bulky and clumsy at the moment, is wireless charging, where you don't even have to connect it. Right now, you can buy a little pad, I don't know if anybody does this, for $100, and it charges just by setting it down. So I think we're going to get to the point where we're never going to talk about battery length anymore. That will be a wonder for the iPhone, where I think battery charging will be very fast and effortless. So I think that's a major innovation.
Over here.
Do you think that it will eventually overtake Facebook?
You asked, I'm not sure, you asked about Google+.
Yeah, and also where do you see it in today's, like the future of social media in today's time?
Okay. You asked about Google+, which is a competitor to Facebook. It came out much later. You pointed out that it got to 400 million users much faster than Facebook did. And also, it introduced features that Facebook quickly had to copy, like circles of friends. The idea that you might have circles of your work friends, your school friends, your bowling league. I think Google Plus has done a phenomenal job. Its growth is starting to slow because Facebook copied a lot of its features. Incidentally, if you talk, Google Plus, of course, comes from Google. Facebook, of course, comes from Facebook, Apple. And what each of them are terrified of is people are going to take their business away. And each one is trying to be its own universe with everything. Facebook recently introduced search because they don't want people going to Google. Google, which is the king of search, introduced Google Plus because they didn't want you going to Facebook. Apple, I mean, they're all, Facebook introduced email because they didn't want you going to Gmail. They're all trying to take over and be the one place you go. My money long term is on Google more than it's on Facebook for all of these things. And you heard what I think of Facebook, not what I think of it as quality, but what I think will happen. I don't think Google Plus is going to get to 1 billion, however. And I think it will be one of the fewer that'll get up to 300-400 million. But Google Plus has done a great job.
Anybody else right here? No?
I'm not from, I mean, I actually worked with Al for a couple of years. I never heard him say the internet. I heard him quoted as saying he invented the internet, which he never said. I never heard him say that the internet was a fulfillment of a prediction by a priest. So I'm not familiar with that. I'll take a look at that. Now, a priest from what era? From modern era?
No.
From Middle Ages, or?
No, later than that. He predicted, he was a biologist, and he predicted that mankind would evolve into total connectivity, mobility, but he thought it would be through telepathy, rather than it seems like...
So the priest... So he said, not priest, it would be through mental telepathy. We are getting, not just through the internet, we are getting into this incredibly connected world. I can talk on that point, that because we have 7 billion people on the planet. We have just about 6 billion mobile phones. Mobile phones are more common than indoor plumbing, refrigerators, and we're going to be at 7 billion mobile phones within the next 3 years. You go to US, we're behind on, we're a third world country where mobile's concerned. Not just our quality. Almost no other country would you have one of the 2 leading carriers, Verizon, run ads that say, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Or, as Andy said when we started, there's no coverage in this auditorium. That just doesn't happen. And our cell phone penetration's at about 93% in the US. The United Arab Emirates, 248%. The average Emirati has 2.5 cell phones. In most of Europe, 120%. But the other way we're being connected is, and this is not science fiction, this already happens with your TiVos, your DVD players, but we are within a couple of years of every device in the home being connected to the internet. Your toaster, your refrigerator, your oven, your dishwasher, your washing machines. That connection will allow them to upgrade the system when it needs to be. It will allow you to control all of those appliances through your phone when you're away. Hans Vesper, the CEO of Ericsson, who built most of the mobile infrastructure in the world, 3 years ago predicted that by 2015 there would be 50 billion connected devices. I used to think he was wrong, overestimating by a huge margin. Now I think he was conservative. So we are connected in every way. I don't have to tell you how connected your cars are, to the point where it's making some people nervous and we're having laws, but we're just getting started. Because people, once they got used to the internet, they really wanted it everywhere. Not just on their desk at home in the office. They want it in their cars. They want it in their pockets. We want it on our airplanes. The FCC later this year is finally going to drop the ban on using these devices, not cell phones, but electronic devices during taxiing and takeoff. And the only reason we're not allowed to use our mobile phones to make calls during flights is because they're afraid of all the disturbances it's going to cause among passengers who are going to start beating each other up. And anyway, so we are truly connected. But I'll look up that quote. I'm not familiar with it.
Up there in the corner right there.
I own a specialty shop in Montecito Upper Village established in 1965. My demographic is women's lingerie, primarily women 30 and up, not Victoria's Secret. I'm just wondering what you think, and I do have an active website, but it is not a buying site.
It's not a what? Oh, so it's an information site.
Yes, it is. It's a current information site. I'm wondering what you think the impact of e-commerce is in my particular business.
Okay. Sure. So I'm not sure. You said you own, in Montecito, you own a shop, a women's lingerie shop. Your demographic is 30 and above. And you have a website, but not for interactions or buying. Your website is for information. Well, first, broader, then I'll come to your business. I don't think there's a business or activity that is not affected by the internet, and most are transformed. Whenever I used to give this talk years ago, different talk, but the same subject, I used to challenge the audience to think of a business that's not going to be affected by the internet. The best answer I got, it wasn't a total, was getting your hair cut. Now, you're never going to get your hair cut by the internet, but you may find your hair cutter on the internet. You're going to set up your appointment on the internet, and you may buy your hair products on the internet. So that's a business that will be affected, not transformed. Incidentally, you want to look at the businesses that have been transformed. Businesses you all know about travel, you all know about books, but even the funeral business has completely changed because of the internet. And if you ever thought there would be a business that would not be affected by technology, it's the funeral business, and it isn't. So the question is your lingerie shop in Montecito going to be affected? And it already has, because people do come look, get your hours, may shop, not shop and buy, but shop and look. And one of the things we've tracked from day one are people who shop in stores and buy online, people shop online and buy in stores, and people who both shop and buy online. So obviously, if you were a chain across a wide area, you would probably have to be in e-commerce. The question is, can you survive, or can you thrive, not survive, as one store in a local community? Probably yes. Probably as long as they can find out everything they want to find. But ultimately, my guess is you will sell online as well, particularly if you want to sell to a wider area than Montecito. And if you do sell online, I'll share we work with a lot of retailers, which as a retailer who does sell online, what you cannot have separate pricing online and in the stores. Your customers, if you do sell online, may want to shop in the store and buy online. They may want to shop online and buy in the store. They may want to buy it online and return it to the store. You have to be all things to all people if you sell. People are terrified about privacy. I'll share with you the most famous example from 2012. This came out of the book, The Power of Habit. It's an incredible example. To show you how much or how little privacy you have, was a 16-year-old girl shopping online at Target. And based on what she was buying, vitamins and supplements, Target concluded she was pregnant and began sending her coupons for prenatal products and care. Her father, this is absolutely true, once again you can go to The Power of Habit, her father sees this and is outraged. He goes in, demands to see the manager, screams at him and berates him, "How dare you imply that my daughter is pregnant?" Manager apologizes. 3 days later, the father comes back into the store. He apologizes and says, "There's things going on in my home I don't know about. She's due in August." Target could figure out online she was pregnant before her father knew. Incidentally, now Target, to avoid that, if they find out that a 16-year-old girl is pregnant, they'll send her the pregnancy items. They'll also send her coupons for lawn mowers and fertilizer. They'll vague it up a bit so it's not so obvious. Scott McNealy, the founder of Sun Microsystems, says there is no privacy, get over it. I think teenagers feel that, but they're beginning to find out that there are things that can hurt them. Jack talked about what happens at spring break. We care greatly about privacy. Our work seems to be saying we track people over long periods. We're 13 years in, so the people who were late teenagers are now in their late 20s, early 30s. We're seeing they're beginning to revert to their parents' attitudes towards privacy. Because if you're 15, unless you're Justin Bieber, your financial life is not very complicated. There aren't many secrets. And unless you're unfortunately ill, your medical history is pretty bland. But as they get older and have information to protect, they seem to care more and more about privacy. So this is a big, big theme. I apologize for a short answer. I really could talk for an hour about privacy, or I was in London last week, or as they say charmingly, privacy.
Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Your statistics are wonderful and impressive, but I'm wondering how large your samples are.
Oh, well, when I talk to academics, that's all we talk about, methodology. In each country, our sample is about 2,000 people. Now, if anyone knows about survey research, to get a representative sample, it doesn't matter whether it's Macau at 300,000 people or China at 1.3 billion, you need about 1,200 people to get a valid sample. So we have about 2,000 in the US, and our sample is totally representative of the American population, with one exception. We don't talk to people under the age of 12. Our questions are a little too complex for the under 12s. We learn about the under 12s from their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, but we don't talk to the under 12s, and that's a shame, because this is a statistic that may boggle your mind. It boggles mine. In America today, half of the 3-year-olds are online. They don't have Facebook pages, they're not writing Word documents, but they're playing with iPads, they're playing games, and if half the 3-year-olds, then healthy percentages of the 1- and 2-year-olds are online. I went through the California school system. I took typing in the 8th grade. There's not a kid who gets to the 8th grade today who hasn't been typing for 6 or 7 years. We are probably raising the worst generation of typists in history because they're all self-taught. But our sample is 2,000 except for under 12s.
Okay,
And-
I'm going to take one more question.
And I'll hang around.
Yeah, Jeff will hang around for a little while. Then I'll ask the final question, and then that will.
This
wrap up the
gentleman
whole
back.
program. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Did you pick somebody?
No, go ahead.
No, I'm not going to have the responsibility of making one person happy and
gentleman
20
over here.
unhappy.
In the movie Back to the Future, there's a scene where Michael J. Fox is interrupted at home by his boss on a video communications device. Is FaceTime statistically being used by over 50% or a great majority? And what do you see for the future of video communication such as FaceTime?
You said in the scene from Back to the Future where Michael J. Fox is interrupted at home by his boss, you asked, I assume you're talking about Apple FaceTime. Was that what, or you were using FaceTime generically for just video interactivity? Okay. Well, you know, I mean, FaceTime itself is one of the biggest. First of all, if you look at all internet use, you look at all cell phone, mobile use, voice by itself is trickling down. As you've probably know, I wasn't one of the first. Actually, it was a great story on the news this week. This is the 40th anniversary of mobile phones. If you saw that story, and back, that makes it 1983, they were carrying around the bricks. I had my first car phone in 1989, and then, I'm sure some of you were earlier than I was, in 89, AirTouch, if you remember, 90 cents a minute, and if no one answered, 45 cents a minute. Now, you've probably seen voices not going away, but voice usage is going down and down. They're giving voice away. You can get unlimited voice. I get 1,000 minutes from AT&T, replenishable for $32. Where the money is for the telcos and where the usage is video and data. And primarily because of FaceTime, although FaceTime, because of those services, FaceTime actually doesn't use telco data. But the real use is watching high-definition movies, using YouTube, interactivity. So I think I mentioned this morning that we added the Republic of Georgia to our project. That was done through a Skype call. I think the use of video conferencing, interacting, if you've seen some of the professional video conferences, the best thing I've ever seen is Cisco's telepresence. This is the future of how we interact with people. And think about it. You can now communicate. I mean, well, the other thing, some of you are as old as I am, maybe even a few people older. I was born in Pittsburgh. We moved to California. My relatives were in Pittsburgh. You remember the 3-minute egg timer. Some of you remember, somebody just reminded me of this, the old scam that when you traveled, you would call somebody person to person who wasn't there, and they wouldn't accept the charges, but it was your way of letting them know you had arrived. Anybody remember that? Yeah. That was when phone calls were expensive. Now most of us have plans where we call the entire country unmetered, $39, $30. So I think this is changing the way families communicate, and I think FaceTime is an example, but there are lots of examples. And the most interesting thing of that is the way, we loved our relatives. We could talk to them 3 minutes a week. Now you can talk to them as much as you want, but the best example of this, we did a project, a wonderful project, let's take a minute, for the Pentagon in 2003, 4, and 5. And if you think about, we wanted to understand how soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan were using technology. And if you think about it, in World War II, Soldiers wrote letters home. And in some I know sometimes took 6 weeks to get home. In some tragic examples, the soldier had been killed a month before the letter got there. And you may, one of the unwritten rules during World War II was you never sent the family of a serviceman or woman a telegram. If you wanted to wish happy birthday, you never, so for some families, just the act of seeing Western Union walk up the walkway could make them faint or go into a panic, because for those who aren't familiar, that's how the military told you somebody was killed in action. And then during the Vietnam War, soldiers were allowed to call home for about 6 minutes every month. And when you can only talk to your loved one, your wife, your husband, even for 6 minutes once a month, all you could pretty much say is, I love you, I miss you, I can't wait to see you. So now we looked at Iraq and Vietnam. And for example, in our sample was a 97-year-old grandmother who said she planned to die never learning what www stood for or what a URL stood for. She never was interested in the internet until they sent her grandson to Iraq. And she had the ability to communicate with him twice a day, and she learned it like that. And then she learned, wait a minute, this isn't so complicated. I can do lots of other things with it. So what we found during Iraq was communication became routine. This is going to sound depressing, but it's actually pretty exciting if you think about it. Some wives reported, or some soldiers reported, that they would call home, and think about World War II and Vietnam, they would call home and their spouse would say, honey, I just put a load of laundry in, can you call me back? But that's actually a pretty encouraging thing. But there also, interestingly, there was a downside. Because when it was Vietnam and you had 6 minutes, it was I love you, I miss you. All of a sudden, the great part was fathers and mothers were doing homework with their children while they were in Iraq and their children were at home. But the downside of it is some soldiers complain that now when I call home, my spouse complains about the children misbehaving, the sink is broken, the bills have to be paid. Everything is changing. It's not always good. It's a combination of good or bad. But the conferencing you described with FaceTime is becoming a defining characteristic of how we relate to people globally.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's fascinating. The one question I was going to ask you before we
going to turn my mic off.
Yeah, before we conclude is when you talk to government agencies, is a concern, I mean, how are they asking you about how social media might be affecting future employment opportunities on social mobility? Are they asking those kinds of questions too?
Governments all ask different things. The British government, all they wanted to talk about was how did Obama use social media in the election campaign? And they wanted to understand what were the lessons as they face election. A lot of governments are interested, particularly interested in those who are not online. How do you get them online? And in America, we have about 14% of Americans are not online. But the interesting thing, this is not true in the developing world, the 14% who are not online is not because of cost. Cost has disappeared as a barrier. There are people who don't care to be online. They're either afraid to be online, they're afraid it's too complicated, or they think that they can live their lives perfectly fine not being online. So the question is, should we try to get them online? How will things change if we do get them online? Everybody's interested in broadband. The Australians are building a national broadband network. The FCC here is looking at building a broadband network. One development, if you haven't tracked, and there's no reason you should, but pay attention, Google is a disruptor. Google has now gone into Kansas City and is putting together 1 gigabit per minute broadband. 1 gigabit per second broadband, which is about 90 times as fast as the broadband most people have for $300 a month, which is pretty amazing. But they're giving away 7 megabit a second broadband to anyone who wants it. Google wants to see the entire country have broadband anywhere they are for free. And why? Because Google is pioneering driverless cars. I love the idea of driverless cars. I live in Los Angeles. I am just waiting for the day my car is going to take care of the traffic, and I'm going to sit in the back seat. And that day's not that far away, because you can see driverless cars on the road. They're licensed in California. They need Wi-Fi. So Google wants to see nationwide, unlimited, fast Wi-Fi and broadband. You can imagine what AT&T and Verizon and Time Warner and Cox and Comcast feel about that. The governments are interested in those issues as well.
One of the strands that we've been developing in Center for Lifelong Learning is a whole series of webinars and kinds of, seminars and courses and workshops on this whole issue of social media and its effects on different aspects of society. Everything from that Jeff addressed today and other topics. So it's like that creativity we can do it on a dime, drawing from the talent that we have in this community. So Jeff agreed to stay for a few minutes before
Sure.
he's got to drive back to LA. Anybody wants to chat with him informally, but remember he's got to drive back to LA.
No, I'm fine.
And thank you very much for coming, and there'll be many more of these activities. Bye-bye.